ceremony in Paris is Sunday. I'm Dave Anthony. This is Fox News.
Lawrence County depends on WDXE News, on the air since 1951. This is The Legend. 105.3, 95.3, WDXE.
That's us, and it's time for Bulletproof Estate Planning with Stan Pierchoski, Pierchoski Law. And how are you, buddy?
Good morning. Good morning, Jeff.
Can you believe it's Friday again already?
It is Friday again already. Although for some reason this Friday seemed long in coming. I don't know why, but it is, and it took a whole week to get here. First of all, happy birthday.
Oh, well, thank you. I've got a lot of birthday wishes.
I know. You got a lot of birthday food
Yeah,
over there.
somebody's got me some cupcakes over there and a donut. And Mean Joe brought me a bag of cherries for some reason, and they're good.
Oh, yeah.
They're really good. I've had a couple of them.
My wife came home with a bag of cherries, and they were the darkest red I've ever seen a cherry.
Yeah.
Boy, were they delicious. They're huge. I mean, they were like just huge.
Yeah, they're good.
I could eat cherries till I couldn't eat anymore. But
yeah, I'm kind of the same way.
But all right. Well, listen, we're going to talk about some things today. But first, I want to mention my seminars coming up, so I don't forget. I'll usually try to catch them at the end, too. But next seminar coming up is August the 14th. Sorry, not August, September. It's about a month out. So what are we today, the 9th? So almost a month out. September the 14th. That's going to be in Pulaski at the American Legion.
Okay.
And I think the address there is like 421 Legion Drive. I mean, if you have any, you just put American Legion in Pulaski. I'm sure your GPS will get you there if you don't know where it is.
Right.
We usually do it on the square, but you can actually see the two from each other. They're just a few blocks away. But that'll be at 10 o'clock on that Saturday. And we call that Will's Trust in the Nursing Home. And if you want to come to that, call the office at 931-363-7222. That's Pierchoski Estate Law, Pierchoski Elder Law, and get RSVP'd for it. The girls will get you signed up. And if you want to come to that, just write. If you have some questions, bring them with you. By all means, bring them with you. I'll answer them.
Absolutely.
If you develop any during the presentation, I'll answer those too. So we're doing another one a little farther out, which is November the 2nd. But that one's for our northern listeners up in Franklin. There's a place up there called Suite 501 on 416 Mary Lindsay Polk Drive up in Franklin. It's a little more of a restricted venue. I think we have a maximum capacity of about 50. So if you want to go to that one, just put it on the calendar. That is a couple months out. It's the same seminar, Will's Trust in the Nursing Home.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. I'll try and bring that up again at the end of the hour. So before we get started, I do want to go over something. Over in the theater, over at the Pulaski there, my office is right beside the Star Theater, and I'm on the board of directors there and pretty involved in what goes on, have been for many years. And we're wanting to do a show and got asked if I wanted to direct it, and I said yes. I do it from time to time, not as often as I can really find time to do, but anyway. It's going to be a very interesting show. And here's why: we've got auditions coming up. It's going to be Grease. Okay.
Oh boy.
Now I've done Grease before, and it's always fun to work with young adults and do that show. But this is what I'm going to call this Grease with a twist, which means all our cast is going to be over 30s and 40. So our Danny Zuko's and our Knickys are going to be played by guys like you and me.
Okay, so I could qualify.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I just think that'll be hilarious, and I think it'll be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, it will be.
When I direct, I have a motto: if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. So I like to have a good time doing it, and I just think it's going to be hilarious to have this elder crowd playing the T-Birds and the Pink Ladies. Because there's a couple of lines in that show coming from our age group. I think will just be have them rolling in the aisle.
That's a good plan.
So I need somebody that's racy that wants to go for Rizzo. It'll just be fun. So anyway, we're having auditions for that on August 19th and 20th at 6 p.m. Now that's at the Star Theater.
Okay. Do you have a lot of good participation? Have a lot of community people that want to be in the play?
Depends on the show, but for Grease, if it was the younger crowd, we would get overrun.
Yes.
The older crowd, I don't know, but I think hopefully I can attract enough people to do that. I think we're saying over 30 because, there are a lot of small parts in Grease, like the school scenes and the dance scene and stuff like that. You got a lot of folks that maybe don't have speaking lines, but or just have very small speaking roles.
Right.
Because it's got to look like they're at school and stuff like that. So there's some roles that are played by adults, and maybe we'll put the younger kids in, like the principal and the teacher and the coach, right?
Just reverse the tables.
Just reverse it. I just think it's going to be funny. So the actual show times are out in the first 2 weeks of November. So.
Okay. Very good.
The other thing happening there is there's auditions on the 23rd and 24th of August for An Evening with Edgar Allan Poe. That's one where they're going to do 3 or 4 of his short stories. They're going to act them out in a show, and that's the first week and 2 weeks of October. That's going to play.
Okay.
So that one's up first, but those auditions are wide open. Anybody wants to?
Yeah.
Those are a little heavier. Edgar Allan Poe was not much of a comedy kind of guy.
well, I gotta ask you something. Of course, we visited your office.
You did.
In recent days, and in looking at there's the famous Beatles picture, album cover where they're walking across the street.
Abbey Road.
Yeah. Okay, and next to that, you have a picture that was taken in Pulaski that is Pulaski's depiction of this Abbey Road picture, and you're in it.
Actually, in Columbia, that is.
Was it in Columbia?
It was Columbia, looking down 7th Street.
Okay, well, for some reason I thought it was there, but you're right, it is Columbia. So tell me the story behind that.
There is a story behind that.
Tell me the story behind that.
Sure. I mean, there is a story, and that is, I'm going to say back in 2012.
Yeah?
Or late 2011. There used to be a phone book. You may remember it, and I don't even know if it's still out, because the phone book's kind of obsolete these days. And
It is.
There was a phone book called the Area Wide Phone Book,
I remember.
and you know how the phone books would come out, and like there'd be Lawrenceburg, and there'd be Pulaski,
Oh, yeah.
and then Linville, and they'd be really sliver thin, right? Because they were just their own little phone book. But they had the Area Wide, they had all those in there.
Right.
Now that was done by a company up in Columbia there called Willow Publishing.
I remember the books.
And I knew the guys who owned it. His name was Shane, and he, I would advertise in the Area Wide, right?
Yeah.
And he knew I was a Beatles fan, and he kind of was too. And one day he called me and said, "Hey, can I Photoshop a copy of the Beatles on the Abbey Road picture, and Photoshop it over a picture of the Columbia Courthouse in the background?" Okay, so I'm shortly after I got licensed, I also became a patent attorney. Okay, I don't do much of that, but I looked into the copyright rights, and it turns out that the copyright's owned for some 70 years, and really couldn't, for a while. And I said, but I got thinking about it because I'm a Beatles fan. I thought that sounds pretty cool, but I said, but you can make your own picture all day long. You can. We got talking about it, and I said, well, we can round up some guys. We'll have the clothes and we'll have the pose, but we won't look like the Beatles. But we can do our own picture.
Do your own depiction of the same image.
That's right. And so the wheels started turning. Okay, and so I actually got a hold of some other attorneys who were all Beatles fans.
Yeah.
And they all agreed to do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we got together one Sunday morning in September of 2011 up in Columbia, and we set it up. Okay, we all had the clothes on, and we were taking a bunch of pictures with the courthouse in the background. We had a guy on a 10-foot step ladder taking pictures, and we had to stop every time a car went by. And they were looking at us like, what's going on?
What are y'all doing?
And then after we did them, we got thinking about it, and we thought, let's shoot some looking down 7th Street, because that looks a lot like the Abbey Road picture.
Yeah.
So we did. I think we shot about 60 photographs, and we finally picked on one that is shooting down, and everybody was in the right pose. When you do that, we tried it walking, it wasn't happening, okay? But then we tried doing it still, and it's hard to make yourself look like you're walking when you're not.
Yeah.
Because when you stand, you sort of have to lean forward a little bit.
Right.
We messed with it. We had a couple of people there who were helping. Pulaski, Channel 3 was up there when the Pulaski Electric Company had Channel 3. They were filming it, and so we finally got a picture that we liked. All right.
Yeah.
And we had 4 attorneys in there. John Colley, who was John. He came in his white suit, and John just cracked me up. He's a Beatles fan, so he showed up not only with his Abbey Road Beatle album, but also with a wig and yellow wire rim sunglasses.
I was going to ask because listen, I studied that picture of you.
Yep.
I studied that picture that y'all took, and the picture, and compared it back and forth. And y'all went to some painstaking detail.
He was into it. And, of course, then we had a younger fellow named Kyle Dodd, who was the Ringo, the second one in line. Then it was me, which was Paul, and I was barefoot and had a cigarette in my hand.
Yep.
And, of course, I was out of step with the other 3, or at least 180 degrees out of step. Everybody had their left foot forward, and I had their right foot forward.
And you were barefoot.
And I was barefoot.
Yeah.
And then we had Gary Howe, which is at the time he was out of Mount Pleasant. And, he's a staunch Beatlemania fan. I mean, Beatle trivia, Yeah. And so we took the picture, and also in that picture, if you look at the Abbey Road picture and you look to the right down the sidewalk, there's this guy standing there there
That's
just
right.
watching.
That's right.
Well, we put a guy there too, and the guy that was there was Shane, the guy that owned the Willow Publishing.
Yeah.
He stood
How
there. He was
about
part
that?
of the picture.
Well,
And so-
I studied that picture quite a bit, basically focusing on you guys and how y'all were trying to get your positions just exactly like the other picture.
and we had to Photoshop out a truck that was parked in one spot, and we Photoshopped in a Volkswagen, but we could not Photoshop in the Volkswagen. Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
And that picture was the cover of the area-wide phone book for the year 2012.
How about
And it
that?
resurfaced last year for the cover of the same phone book, which I guess they still do, in 2023.
Really?
Yeah.
I did not know they still did the book.
I didn't either, but that was the story behind that. And I had several copies of it, and I think in 2013,
Yeah.
I remember I had a broken leg at the time, but there was a group that came to the Martin Methodist College, which is now UT Southern there in
Right.
Pulaski.
UT Southern.
And out on the lawn, they were called the Wanna Beatles, and they were a cover band. That's all they played. They dressed like the Beatles, they looked like the Beatles, they sounded
Yeah.
like the Beatles. That's
Yeah.
all they played.
Yeah.
Well, of course, I went there, and I'm in the field, got a broken leg, but I'm screaming my head off. And so anyway, when I was done, I had this thing called a knee walker where you can kneel on it and buzz
yeah.
around, but
Yeah.
below the knee, I was. Anyway, I went up to those guys with one of those things, got them to autograph my phone book. That's the one. Anyway, so that was the picture behind that, and that, I think that picture is actually in the courthouse in Columbia, and we're calling that the picture to beat.
That's cool. It's a cool picture. It really, really is.
It was fun. It was fun. So one is Abbey Road, the other one is Attorney Road, I guess, because
Yeah, Attorney Road.
It was.
So all four guys were attorneys in that.
They were.
Well, I actually wondered if the gentleman who was supposed to be John, if that was his real hair or not.
No, he was wearing a wig.
He was wearing a wig.
And wire rim yellow glasses, yellow
about
tinted
that?
glasses. Yeah, he
How
was.
about that?
He was definitely into it. That was John Colley.
He went out and bought a white suit for the occasion.
I think he
too.
had a white suit because
Okay.
I remember asking him. I said, "You have a white suit?" And he said, "Yeah, I got one." And I told him, and all three of the attorneys that I asked, I barely got the question finished, and it was, "I'm in." Yeah, I'm in. They were just avid Beatles fans, and they all showed up. Like I said, it was like 7:00 on a September morning. It was
That'd probably
cold.
be about the only time you could do it too, because of traffic. Would be on a Sunday.
And
morning.
actually, back then in 2011, Kyle Dodd, who was with the district attorney's office, we had just down in Pulaski in August of that year had tried a fiercely fought murder case. So,
Oh wow.
but anyway, it was fun. It was fun. So,
Our phone line is ringing. Let's
and we
see.
hadn't even given the number.
Hadn't even given the number. Hey, good morning. You're on WDXE with us. Hello, hello.
Happy birthday.
Hello, hello. I don't know.
May have been happy birthday. But
Yeah,
while
it might have
we're-
been happy
While we're
birthday.
talking about the calls, let's give them a telephone number.
Yeah.
Used to be on the wall over there, but I think I remember.
It's-
It's 931-766-9393.
766-9393. If you'd like to talk to Stan this morning, 766-9393.
Actually, it is on the wall, but it's slightly behind you. But I see it now. Okay.
See it now,
The
okay.
only thing that makes me stop and think is the 766 or the 762.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's like Pulaski, it's 363 or 424, And anyway, call in if you got a question.
Yeah, we want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And you've had a busy week, I know.
It was. We had some successes this week, as a matter of fact. We had successes and we had a surprise. One of the surprises we have is we have we're talking about our long-term care thing,
Right.
eligibilities that we're doing for people.
Right.
And we had a family that hired us to get the dad and the husband eligible. And it was pretty straightforward. And of course, we get, when they always ask for some information. It's just typical. You send in the application. By the time they get around to getting it and looking at it, they'll start asking for questions. They'll ask for pretty generic stuff most of the time.
Sure.
And we always know what they're going to ask for, and we always gather that information ahead of time, so that practically the day they ask it is the same day we send it to them. And we did. And we document things very well. As a matter of fact, we won a fair hearing about 2 or 3 years ago, and the reason the court was so favorable to us was they commented on everything was so well documented that it proved the case. Just nothing was like somebody just stating it happened.
Right.
Here it happened, and here's the proof that it did happen. So,
Yeah.
anyway, they made what they call an information request, or sometimes it's referred to as a verification request. And they asked for like 3 things, maybe 4, I can't remember. And we responded. And we got fax confirmations, and we have, the fax gives us an image of what was sent, the actual document. And so we sent them in, and we never gave it another thought. And next thing we know, we get a letter from them saying they denied eligibility for failure to respond to an informational request.
Yes.
Now, this is not the first time they've done this, but it aggravates me when they do it because
I'm sure.
you know darn well they got it. I mean, anyway, so so we spent some time on the phone with them, and we said, look, we filed an appeal, of course, but part of our strategy sometimes is file the appeal, and with it say we're appealing the facts that you claim that we didn't send this stuff. We're giving you notice of appeal, which is all we're required to do is say we appeal it. That's all that's necessary. But we include everything in there and say, here, you ask for these bank statements. Here's the fax that sent them. Here's the image of the fax that we sent. On the fax is the date and time. It's clearly within the 10 days. It's actually had within 7 or 8 days to spare.
Yeah.
And then the next one, we document it and send it all to them. Well, yesterday we ended up getting a hearing date, which is, I think the 13th, which is next week.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I sort of ask myself the question: would I go to a court? Now, this is not a TennCare court; it's an administrative court, so it's not.
Yeah.
And they are relatively fair. I mean, they don't always lean towards TennCare, maybe a little bit sometimes, but
Yeah.
I don't know that I'd want to go to court and argue against the kind of documentation that we have. I mean, I don't understand why they won't just look and see and say, yes, we got it. Now, the fact that they may not have seen it or read it isn't the issue.
Right.
It was sent. And we sent it again, and we said, here it is, So I very much expect them to contact us before the hearing date and just say, okay.
Just say, never mind.
We agree, we got it. I mean, I would hate to hear what the judge has to say to them if they try to maintain the fact that they didn't receive it when we can show the proof that they did. I mean, it's a little bit annoying because it's a futile effort on their part. Unless there's something I'm not seeing, but that's usually not the case. But I guess it could be. So we got a plan B in place anyway. But anyway, so that was something I didn't expect, but it does happen from time to time, and it's just the nature of the beast.
I probably don't need to get off on this, but it's almost a symptom of our time.
Well, there's that, and there's always the old saying, tell me this isn't a government operation. And of course, I can recognize certain things. And people at TennCare, I think there's a lot of attrition. I think, it's the kind of place where you never get the same person on the phone twice.
Yeah.
And I think it's people come and people go. And I think that it's people that get hired there don't have 100% understanding of the rules. They give them a manual, and they're supposed to follow the manual.
Yeah.
And that helps them sometimes because if I know they're working from the manual and I want to discuss something with them, I walk them straight to the part in the manual, and we start talking from there. So, but I wish I could be a fly on the wall for a day or two at TennCare.
It's bound to be frustrating though. It's one thing for someone to just make an honest mistake, but it's another thing when you've given them everything they asked for and they look at you and say we didn't get it.
Well, no, I don't. That's coming from two different places. One, they might have something in mind and really feel like they didn't get it or something. I just can't imagine that thing. Or the other one is once they deny, sometimes they just take the position, well, it's denied. You just go to appeal and get it. And we'll work on it more if they overrule the appeal. I mean, if they overrule the denial. I mean, that's just passing the buck. I mean, it's like, why can't we just talk about it and save everybody some time, energy, and effort? Because they're very backed up on appeals.
Oh, yeah.
Very backlogged on that.
Yeah.
And, they're always looking to resolve as many as they can without going to hearing because that's just slow as molasses to do it that way.
You said, describe the two different, is there different courts or different processes, or what did you call it? You called it an administrative court.
It's an administrative court.
So there is an actual judge, or is it just okay?
Yeah, there is, and usually the fair hearings, they're almost completely telephonic since COVID. They were often telephonic before COVID, but now they're all
that way.
Yeah, telephonic and or Zoom. You can do it. And I mean, it's kind of you're gonna have to get used to that because you call witnesses. It's just like any other court. You call witnesses. You give argument. You're going to call a witness. You call them in. The court swears them in, and you're just kind of listening to everybody's voice on the phone.
I'm kind of like you. If I was the judge, and I looked at the documentation, I would look at those folks and say, "Why are you wasting our time? This is obviously they've given you everything you asked for."
Well, and that's what I'm hoping for because the way we give it to them and the way we document it, we have been doing it that way for years, and it's always been successful. So if they have something up their sleeve that I don't know about, I mean, they're not supposed to do that.
Yeah.
When there's an appeal, they're supposed to give us the grounds of the denial so that when we appeal it, we know what we're going to appeal. I mean, You just can't get in there and with an appeal and just say, well, why are you appealing our decision? You just can't be, because.
Right.
It doesn't, you have to have a reason. You got to go in and say, here's why. Now, if they say, if I get in there and say, here's what we're appealing. They denied for failure to respond to an informational request. Here's the informational request. Here's what they asked for. Here's what we did in response.
Yeah.
Now, for them to come up with something else other than that subject matter is unfair surprise. I mean, we're supposed to know exactly why they denied it so we can rebut it.
Yeah.
That's the whole idea of an appeal. And so we have to know. So if they bring it up, then we're going to have to claim surprise and say, listen, that was not grounds of the appeal that they notified. It's called due process of law. We have to know what we're defending, what we're arguing about. You can't keep it a secret. You know what I mean? You can't blindside us.
Right.
You tell us why you denied us, and we'll argue the rightness or wrongness of that. If we're wrong, we'll concede and do something different. If we're right, we want to appeal it. You cannot. So,
most of our mentality about courts or any kind of court is based on what we've seen on TV.
Yeah,
and we think that there's always this element of surprise where the lawyer brings in.
There are some times when that is not okay, but there's some times when that can happen.
Yeah.
But it's very rare.
Yeah.
It's all what they call interest of fair play.
Yes.
Let your opponent know what your concerns are, because the courts are always interested in resolving matters non-judicially if it's possible. So, but if you got to go to trial, you got to go to trial. And so we've been very successful dealing with things before we get to court.
Right.
And I'm still optimistic this one will. We just got the date yesterday. And they gave us a date yesterday, and yesterday was the 8th, and the hearing's the 13th, so, which is next week, I think. 13th or 18th now, I can't remember, but it's next week, next Thursday, I think. So we'll see. And like I said, I'll let you know next Friday how that went.
Well, I'd be interested to hear
I'll
how
let
that
you know
comes
whether
out.
whether the hearing actually took place or whether we reached an agreement.
Interesting.
But one thing I want to go over is just kind of like what this process looks like. I'm talking about the appeal. That's kind of at the end of the process, right? Or toward the end of the process. And I'd like to spend today and go over that. Just kind of put things in perspective. I won't get into the individual particulars of certain things, but
Sure.
But so, when somebody has a family member in crisis,
Yes.
okay, and they think, okay, we need to do something about it.
Right.
And so, they come and they hear me on the radio here or something, and a lot of people tell me, I listen to you on WDXE, and
Yeah.
I want to talk to you because, I always thought nothing could be done. Once you're in care, I just thought, it's just SOL. Everything you got's going to go towards the cost of care.
Right.
I mean, that's common knowledge.
Yeah.
It's a misnomer. I mean, it can happen that way, but it doesn't need to happen that way. Let me know. You know what I mean? So there's things that you can do. I mean, there's plenty of rules. There's plenty of options that are built into the TennCare Act and the supporting acts like our Deficit Reduction Act, the Catastrophic Illness Act, things that go along with that create these set of rules that we're allowed to follow. So somebody comes to me and we sit down and they explain the situation to me, the circumstances, what's going on. One of the first things we like to find out is where are we in this Medicare window. You've heard me talk about that before, because when you're in a facility, it's expensive. $9,000 a month. I think the average I've seen now is pushing $9,300. But and what is it, like $310 a day or something, whatever. So it's expensive. So, but when people go into the facility, most of the time, I'm going to say 95% of the time, but most of the time, it starts with some sort of event. It's called a spell of illness, okay? A fall and a broken bone, or a stroke, and you have to recover from it, or a sickness like a septicism or something that you got to recover from, right?
Right.
And so you go to the hospital. They deal with you. They fix your broken hip. You're in there for what they call the 3 midnights, 3 days.
Yeah.
And then that facility will say, look, we're going to discharge you to a facility to rehab whatever your problem is. Classic thing is stroke, right?
Yeah.
You have to rehabilitate from a stroke. So they send you to a facility to rehabilitate. Now, that's all covered by your insurance, Medicare. And they cover all of it for 20 days, and then they cover a portion of it for up to the next 80 days. So, there's a 100-day window there, or can be a 100-day window. I often say the key words in that is up to 100, and they're the ones that decide the up to part.
Right.
And that's based on your rehabilitation. So there's this, So, and that can terminate early, okay? But I find it's a little more generous than I would have expected, but it usually goes to 100 days. But it usually always goes to 30, 60, that kind of stuff. But they can terminate it for several reasons based on your rehabilitation. In other words, if they send in weekly reports, the facility or the doctors.
Yes.
And the weekly reports, if the weekly reports say, okay, the last couple of weeks, he's completely rehabilitated. Well, if that's after 60 days, then they're going to terminate because you're there for rehabilitation and you have.
Yeah.
Kind of like a broken hip and you need to walk again.
Yeah.
That doesn't take too long compared to other things, but you get there, right?
Yeah.
So they quit paying. Or the doctors will say, look, we've been PTing this person for 3 weeks in a row now, and he's just not getting any better. This is as good as it's going to get. It's what they call plateauing out.
Yeah.
They'll stop paying because it's rehabilitation, and you're not going to do any more of it, according to the medical people, and so they'll stop. And sometimes we even get people that say, well, if you refuse PT something like two times or 3 times, then they'll quit.
Yeah.
So if you're there, they'll say, we'll pay for rehabilitation, but if you don't do it, we're not going to pay.
Right.
Or the last time they'll terminate is if you reach 100 days, whether you've rehabilitated or not. You can reach day 100, and it's like, well, wait a minute, he's coming along great, he's improving every day, but he's still got some more rehabilitation to go. 100 days is up. That's the end of it. Okay, so, so bottom line is we have this window where they're paying. And after we get to the 20 days when it's a split, usually people supplement the Medicare will pay the difference. So really out of pocket to the patient or the patient's family is usually nothing until that happens. So that is a prime opportunity for us to do what needs to be done, because if the family comes in to hire me, then we're gonna, we have to gather a lot of stuff. You and I talked about that.
Yes.
They've got to gather a lot of stuff. It's pretty intense, and it's stuff you might not think you have to gather. It's usually not too hard to get, but it is an effort. Okay.
Yes.
And it's it's kind of stuff like, you got somebody they're married, or they're married but now their spouse passed away. Well, they're going to want to see a marriage certificate. If you say, here I am, I used to be married, they're going to say, well, that's great, but we're not really going to take your word for it. We would like to see a marriage certificate, right?
Yes.
And then you want to know if the spouse is alive or not. So if you say no, they're gone, say, okay, we'd like to see a death certificate of that spouse. I mean,
you just have to verify.
And you almost want to say, why? I mean, but anyway, and you got to verify stuff. A lot of ID stuff, driver's license. Sometimes they'll ask for a passport. I never quite understand why sometimes, but but if we've got it, we get it, and we gather all this documentation. There's all this stuff that is just simply about identity. Okay. Then there's a bunch of stuff. Then we start dealing with the areas that we're going to be dealing with. Now, the first thing we got to qualify for is medically needy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that's a little bit out of my lane because I'm not a doctor. So I don't make the call of medically needy, but I kind of have a feel for what they consider medically needy and what they don't, right?
Yeah.
And we're familiar with the exam that they do. Sometimes in certain facilities, an early exam they'll do is called a PASR. Mm-hmm. What they do to get eligible for TennCare, we call PAE, the pre-admission evaluation. Right. Now that's a test where they do, I've never actually witnessed one, but I do have the manual, and it's about 300 pages long. And sometimes I think I'm the only one that's ever read it, to be honest with you. I wonder. But somebody will probably call and say, wait a minute, I have. But talk about a cure for insomnia. But anyway.
I bet.
But it's an exam they do, and it's designed to determine the level of care. And the level of care is based on what are these activities of daily living can you do and can you not do. So let's just spend a moment on that. You got these things called ADLs. They stand for activities of daily living. I think there's 8 of them. It's like dressing yourself, bathing yourself, toiletring yourself, feeding yourself, getting up and moving and ambulating around, administering your own prescription medication if you can. There's a couple of 3 more, okay? Now, if you need help with like 3 or more, you're going to qualify for full-skilled nursing facility. And so this exam is important because it determines a couple of things. One, it determines the level of care. And, of course, the level of care usually determines the cost.
Right.
And so, there are some people in a facility that can just need a minimal level of care, and other people maybe can't do hardly any of the ADLs, and they need care with everything. 24/7 practically. Right. And so your level of care in a facility varies. And that's what this is supposed to determine. Now, then they give you a score. Now, the scoring system is kind of funky, but my understanding is you got to score like a 9 or above for level 1 care, which is nursing home care. And then it's something different for the waiver program of assisted living or the home and community-based programs that they have. It's a different score because those are lower levels of care, right?
Right.
You know, assisted living,
Right.
you don't, if you're assisted living, you can do a lot of things yourself. You just need help with a couple of them. But so we're going to stay with a full-skilled nursing facility. And so, if you score 9, then they'll send the PAE to TennCare because it's the facility that does the exam. They will send the examination and the acuity score that you get to them. And TennCare will send back a letter, and they're going to say we either approve the PAE or we deny it.
Yes.
And that's the standard for qualifying for what we call medically needy. I mean, TennCare says we'll pay for care,
Right.
but you need to be there. You can't just be hanging out there because, like I often say, you can't just check yourself in because you want to play Parcheesi with the guys and have them pay the bill, right?
Right.
You got to have a need to be there. So, and again, I'm not the doctor. I don't make that decision. I think I talked at length on a show not too long ago where when sometimes they have suddenly scored the person well and said, hey, he's ready to go home. And we would appeal that. And my argument was the only way I know how to appeal this is hire our own doctor to do an exam and
Right.
see if we can have a battle of the experts, right?
Right.
So I don't really get involved with the medically needy. And, that's if the person needs to be there. Because a lot of times people come to me and say, Dad's, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And I'll tell me, but he's still at home. So it's like, well, it's not ripe yet. It's not ripe yet. He has to be in a facility. So, anyway, so we're hopeful that they'll come back and say, yeah, we agree, qualifies for level 1 care.
Perfect.
That's step number 1. Now, step number 2 and 3 is where we spend most of our time. And step number 2 now is just the income qualification. So, income. Now, don't confuse income with resources, right? Income is your stream of income, like Social Security. Right. Maybe you have a pension, okay?
Right.
Maybe you're drawing on your 401k or something like that. Maybe you got something in an Edward Jones or Raymond James or Morgan Stanley account that generates a little bit of interest. It's income. And they're going to look at that. That has to be below a certain level. And even if it's not below a certain level, there's things we can do to make it qualified. So we spend some time on that, but that's a pretty simple thing to solve, income. Where we spend most of our time is the third category is resource qualification. And that's the stuff you own, okay? Now, the income, like Social Security or a pension, those things don't survive death. I mean, at the end of, if you pass away, they just stop coming, right?
That's right.
That's
and
so,
right.
Now, but when we back up a little, when we do the income, if we have some income we can control. Now, we can't control how much Social Security sends us. We can't control the pension usually. But if we have, let's say we have some investment account with a brokerage firm.
Right.
And it's generating, I don't know, and it's paying us $200 a month purely out of the interest that it earns.
Yeah.
It's growing, but then you say, I want $200 a month just to supplement my Social Security and stuff, so I want that. Well, if we end up in care, what we want to do is we want to terminate that income and just say, okay, just keep rolling that back into the instrument because don't pay me income anymore. And the reason is when you're in care, all your income goes to the cost of care.
Yes.
There's no saving that. The only thing we can do sometimes is if you're married and your spouse or the one that's not in care is below a certain level, what we call the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance, the MNNA.
Yes.
And if it's below that, we can shift some income from one to the other to get the healthy spouse up to that number. But for the most part, the general rule is all the income goes to cost of care.
Yes.
So if we can minimize that, I mean, why continue to draw $200 off your account that's earning money just to funnel it straight to the cost of care? Not necessary. So we terminate it. Okay, so we're income qualified. Now we go to the resource. Now when we go to resources, now in that resource is going to be that account that we were stopped taking the $200 a month off of, right? That's what we own. That there's two things there. We had the asset plus we had the income from it. So we terminate the income, and now we deal with the resources, and that's the stuff that you own. Your home, other real estate, the vehicles, the money in the bank, the investment account I just talked about, the CDs or the stocks and bonds or gold, or just stuff that you own what's your assets. I use the word assets, or it's technically called resources. So now you got to qualify with that stuff. And the way you qualify with it, it's essentially all considered countable.
Yes.
And you have to have less than $2,000 of countable assets. okay. Which about 110% of the people do.
Yes.
You know, if you had to have less than $2,000 of assets and that meant $2,000 to your name, nobody would be in the care. I mean, anyway. But so now the way we do that is we change the asset from countable to non-countable. And you can do that. That surprises people when I tell them that you can actually modify this. And we, sometimes I do a deep dive on this on my Sunday program. I think we're actually talking about that now, where we different strategies for changing countable assets to non-countable. One of the classic ones you can do, of course, it's not in a crisis case, it's a couple years in advance, is put it into an asset protection trust, right?
Yes.
Like the home and all your real estate, those big ticket items. The minute you put it into that trust, it has shifted from countable to non-countable. There's nothing, they can't get at it.
Right.
And so that's what we're going to do, but now we're doing it in a crisis case. And we're going to doing it in a crisis case is a little different because the trust is usually not a good tool at that time. There are times when it is, but for the most part it isn't, because when you put it into a trust, the trust needs, the divestment to the trust triggers a 5-year period that we're worried about being punished for.
Right.
And we don't have 5 years because the individual's in care now.
Right,
okay?
exactly.
The only time that's really a viable option is if we have trying to save the family farm, okay?
Yeah.
And we know if we put it in the trust, they can't get at it. Now, we may be dealing with a penalty period, but we'll see.
Right.
But so we start looking at our different strategies, and now the strategies are heavily dependent on whether you're married or whether you're single.
Yes.
Okay, the person that's in crisis. When you're married, we got a lot to work with.
That's right.
When you're not married, we are somewhat limited. Now, those limitations changed back in 2006 when we adopted the Deficit Reduction Act. And, I mean, they took away a few of our tools back then, but it doesn't mean we're completely without options. And so one of the things we like to do is, there's several things we can do, depending on if you have real estate involved. Real estate's a little more complicated at the 11th hour, especially if you want to keep the real estate. If you can sell it and turn it into money, I can deal with that a little easier than I can deal with the actual real estate. But there are things we can do. We can tie up the ownership. We can we can turn it into an inaccessible asset. We can modify its ownership in such a way that it's no longer countable.
Yeah.
But you still have it.
Yeah.
We're not changing your ownership. We're changing the category of asset. Okay. Now, sometimes I say, and I'm sure I've said on this radio before, when I talk about countable asset or non-countable, that's the language that's in the statute, countable.
Yeah.
And so you might say, okay, what does that mean? A good substitute for the word countable would be available for the cost of care. So if you got $50,000 in the bank,
Yeah.
that's available for the cost of care, right?
Yes,
Because
it
you can
is.
go get it and you can pay. It's available to you
Right.
for the cost of care.
Right.
A non-countable asset is not available to you for the cost of care. So if we can take a piece of real estate and we can somehow work in a joint owner, like have them buy a share, or if it's a few years earlier, we can just give them a share, but that's a gift we have to deal with. But if we end up with joint ownership, okay, like with a non-spouse, has to be a
Right.
non-spouse, because
Right.
when you're spouses, it's all considered the same. So you could tie it up with a non-spouse. Now, the theory here is when we disclose that, they're going to say, well, this is a countable asset, and say, well, it's not, because 10-Care or the 10-Care Act and the legislature has always recognized the fact that when people own property, you can't make them sell it.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what we do is we say, okay, yeah, how much of this property do you own? We own 80%. Who owns the other 20%? My son. Did he buy it or did you give it to him? Well, he bought it. Okay. Or if he gave it to us, I gave it to him more than 5 years ago, right?
Right.
But either way, and now it's like, okay, so now we have the son just sign an affidavit that says, I refuse to sell, because the only way they can recover is if they can sell the property. And you can't sell it unless you have the consent of all the owners. And one of the owners refuses to sell. Now, when I say that, people always say to me something like, well, don't they get mad at you when you do that?
Yeah.
And no, they recognize it immediately, because now the law, their 10-Care Act says if that happens, they must now classify that resource as inaccessible. They can't get at it. Now, and the reason is it's not available to you for the cost of care because you can't sell it,
Yeah.
because the other owner doesn't agree. So that's a good example. And that works well with real estate. It does not work with bank accounts. And the reason is when you have a joint owner on a bank account, both owners have access to everything. So let's say you have somebody that's in care, and they have a child that they have a bank account with, and they're both
Yes.
co-owners.
Yes.
Let's stick with a nice round number, $50,000 in there. Well, if you say, well, that we tied up the ownership, is that inaccessible? The answer is no, because now the question is they'd ask the person, you have this bank account, how much money's in it? $50,000. How much can you get at?
Yeah.
And being an owner, the end, they don't ask this question because they know the answer, but
Right.
I'm spelling it out. The answer is I can get it, all of it.
Yeah.
Now the co-owner, the child, he can get it all of it too. It's co-owned, right?
Yeah.
And so their theory is going to, if you can get it all of it, then it's all available to you for cost of care. Now that's a real problem. Now a lot of people put somebody on the account just to put them there. It's all the
Right.
patient's money, but they just put the child there thinking it will help, okay?
Yes.
But it would be a real problem if, in fact, it really was a joint account where 25,000 of it belonged to the patient and 25,000 actually belonged to the son. That
Right.
it's all available for the cost of care, and
Right.
that does not change. And so, the ownership is different. That does not create inaccessible when it's money in the bank.
Yes.
So we look at all these things. There's lots of things we look at. There's a lot of strategies. There's a lot of things. It's very circumstance driven.
Yes.
It can be as unique as somebody I can remember recently had a lot of assets tied up in a LLC,
Yeah. Yeah.
and he wasn't the sole owner of it. He was the majority owner, but he wasn't the whole owner.
Right.
And so there was a lot of assets there, and they would all be exposed. So what we did was we simply had the LLC folks have one of their regular meetings, and they changed the operating agreement to reflect that no owner
Yeah.
of shares can sell his shares without the consent of the other owners. Now that's usually kind of in there by default.
Yeah.
But whenever someone brings that to me, I ask them for the operating agreement. We look at it. If I don't see it, I say, let's put it in. And that creates this. That's the same thing. So all those assets were pretty much saved by the stroke of a pen by changing the. Now, you still got to deal with the 5 years if you're like giving ownership to somebody to create this situation. The time to give stuff away, of course, is years before. So there's lots of strategies that we can do. Now, if another good strategy, if it's available to us, and I often say this is maybe the only time that being disabled is an advantage.
Yeah.
If you have a disabled child, and of course we're talking about a documented disability, which is typically SSDI or SSI. If you have a documented disability, you can pretty much give away most of everything you have to a disabled child
Okay.
without a penalty. The only other person you can give away property to without a penalty is a spouse. There's one or two very strict examples, like a blind child or a child under 21 that
Right.
living in the home. But typically the two people, the biggest advantage to give stuff away and not have to incur a penalty period is a spouse or a disabled child.
Right.
So if you don't have the disabled child and you don't have a spouse, now the boat is we have to do something with this money. Okay.
Yes.
It's got to go to somebody, because the only way to get rid of it at this point, at this late hour, is literally to divest it, give it away.
Yes.
And so now the problem is whoever we decide to give it to, whether it's a charity, another person, or even if we took it out in the backyard and burned it, we're giving it away, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to incur a penalty now because there's nobody left to give under the exceptions that is penalty free.
Right.
So we're stuck. And that's one of the things that makes being single a little more limiting. We still have options, but they're not as good as when you're married.
Right.
And so one of the classic ways we can give away money, okay, so we take what they have. Remember I talked about maybe a 401k, maybe they've got an Edward Jones account or maybe gold account or whatever, Fidelity,
Right.
Bonds, whatever. We pretty much reduce everything to cash. And what we're going to do is we're going to give some away. Now, we could give away something that's already in a posture of what it's
Right.
like. Like, let's say some of the money was in CDs. And let's say if our
Right.
gift was, if the amount of CDs fit in the gift, we could just give the CDs. We wouldn't have to cash them out.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, or let's say I have an Edward Jones account and had $20,000 in it. And our gift was going to be, $50,000.
Right.
We could give away the account just like it is, just reassign ownership.
Right.
Because that fits within the gift that we're going to. So what we're going to do is gift stuff away. And we're going to do it in such a way as our Deficit Reduction Act allows us to do.
Right.
And what we're allowed to do, again, we adopted this in 2006, the Deficit Reduction Act. And the Deficit Reduction Act says if an individual may divest away or gift away a portion of his funds and retain a portion, okay? So the first thing that should light off your your bells when I say that is we're giving it all away. It's all going away.
Yes.
We're going to give away part of it. We're going to retain part of it. And when the portion that we retain, we're allowed to purchase a non-countable stream of income. Okay. So between those two things, it's all gone. So let's go back to our $50,000 that we have. We're going to give away a portion of that.
Okay.
We're going to take the other portion that's left and buy this, which is an annuity. We're going to buy it. Mm-hmm. Now, the end result of that is we've just gotten rid of everything, either by gift or by purchase. It's all gone, right?
For those that might not know, how does an annuity work?
Well, I'm kind of getting up to it. I'm trying to cover the basic groundwork. I guess I better hurry up because I'm getting later in the hour.
Okay.
But we can do that. But pretty much we've divested the person of all their wealth.
Yes.
So what we're going to do is when we give property away, that should set your alarm bells off and say, well, doesn't that trigger a penalty period? Because we're giving it away. It's definitely within 5 years because it's going to be like a week before we actually apply, right?
Right. Right.
So, and it does trigger a penalty period. Now, the portion we retain is going to be derived mathematically that it is going to be designed, all this is back calculated, and it's all designed so that this annuity will pay, coupled with the income, the cost of care, the exact cost of care for the exact length of the penalty.
Yes.
Actually, it's a little less than the exact cost of care, and there's a reason for that, but we'll save that for another time. Kind of a little trick we learned at TennCare pools sometimes, and we're not going to let them do that. But we usually have a little shortfall of a couple $100 every month just for there's a specific reason why we do that. That's intentional, but it really doesn't change the outcome of how much money ends up where. So we gift part of it away. Now that's a complete gift. So that you give it to a child, it's theirs.
Yes.
Done deal. Not coming back. But so TennCare says, well, we can't take the money back we can't make them give it back, right? Mm-hmm. But we can impose a penalty period for you doing that. So we know that. Now, what we retained, we're going to use the money that we know the income. Remember I said all the income goes to cost of care.
Right.
That and the annuity, we've got to put those two together every month to pay the bill. So we're essentially going to private pay for the penalty period that's going to create.
Right.
And the penalty period, it depends on the size of the gift is how much it is. Yeah. And the amount we can save is heavily dependent on the income and the cost of care. If the income's low and cost of care is high, we get down closer to the 55 or 60%. If it's assisted living situation where the cost of care is low and the person has pretty good income, then I've seen as high as in the upper 70% of what we can salvage. It's all number driven.
Right.
And so now we have to buy this annuity. It's called a Medicaid compliant annuity. So the Medicaid compliant part of it, the key word there is compliant. The Deficit Reduction Act says you can buy one of these if, a couple of things, if it's compliant. The compliant issues are, one, it's got to be actuarially sound. So we have to go to the tables and say, okay, our patient is 82 years old. We go to the Social Security tables and the life tables, and we look up male, 82 years old. And, of course, they've figured out how long you're going to live.
Yeah.
And so we are bound to the annuity cannot be longer than that person's lifespan.
Right.
We did one not too long ago for somebody that was 97. We had to cap the annuity at 32 months. But usually that's not an issue.
Yeah.
Exceeding that. So I guess you can't take somebody who's 90 years old and have a 40-year annuity.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's got to be actuarially sound. The other one is it has to be irrevocable and unassignable, which means once you do it, you can't pull it back.
Right.
And here's what they're afraid of. You do this, you qualify, they say, okay, you're approved, we start paying, then you go cash out the annuity, and now you have all that money.
Yeah.
They don't want you to be able to get it back.
Yeah.
They'll let you do it, but it's got to be gone. So it's irrevocable and unassignable. Then there's a couple minor things. It's got to be equal payments every month. You can't do $50 a month and then a balloon payment at the end.
Right.
It's got to be equal payments. So those are pretty much the Medicaid compliant issues. And, they'll accept the annuity. They'll want to see the policy, and it's got all that in there.
Yeah.
So now the person is eligible because, remember, they either gave it away or spent it on the annuity.
Yeah.
Now, in there somewhere, we're going to keep their $2,000, or we're going to make it about $1,500 or $1,800, stay off the edge of eligibility, right? Because they're allowed to have $2,000 is exempt, so they can have that. So that's all factored in there. And so now the person's eligible. So literally, the way this works is we make the gift, we purchase the annuity, we file the application. Because now we know when the application goes in, they're eligible because they don't have anything anymore. They either gave it all, they gave it between giving it away and purchasing annuity, there's nothing left.
Right.
Which was the whole idea. Now they're eligible, we apply. They'll approve and say, you know what, you're approved, but there's this penalty period. And you say, we know we're going to be private paying for this private period.
Right.
And if the person passes away during that period, the money goes to the remainder of it goes to the beneficiary, which is the heir.
Awesome.
So I guess I'm running out of time, but and I know the phone was ringing, and I probably should have stopped talking. But
Well, that was a number I recognized. He might have had a question.
if we can squeeze it in, call.
Yeah, Big D, you can call back right quick if you want to. We got a couple more minutes, and we can stretch it if we need to.
But
good information though this morning.
It's a process, and it has to be done. It has to be done right. And when you do it right, it'll work. Now, there's always the caveats that I bring up where we do it and we do it right, but then they say, well, we didn't get the stuff you sent us, or we don't agree with this, or,
Right.
But we get there.
Hey, buddy, you want to talk to us?
Yeah, I enjoy listening to this hour every Friday. I've learned a lot, and sometimes I'm a little more confused on a lot of stuff, but what I figured out, the only way to really beat the system is to just not die. I think that's the only way you can beat the system and do anything is just not die.
You know what that means, don't you?
Yes, sir.
It means we ain't going to beat the system.
That's right.
You're going to die sooner or later, buddy.
We're going to beat it a lot of years, hopefully.
There's nothing that better, though, than good planning for it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And he does a great job of explaining everything, too. Stan does an excellent job.
All right.
I appreciate
him
that.
doing that for everybody. If they just listen, and you'll get a few tips, and sometimes you'll be confused, but
Yeah.
Well, I know it gets
he'll help you with it.
I know it gets a little number heavy on the radio.
Good information. Thank you, Big D.
Yeah.
Thank you, man. Very good.
Well, no, I
He's
appreciate
a
that.
loyal listener there.
No, I
And
appreciate it.
Good buddy of mine, and I thought he might have something to say. So.
Well, I just wanted to comment on one thing is, nothing we do, I guess, would fall in the category of beating the system. I mean, we're using the rules. Everything I just explained about this annuity is defined in the Deficit Reduction Act how to do it, and that's what we do, and that's how we save it.
It's a legal way to protect your assets.
That's right.
That's what this is all about. Man.
The bottom line is you do not have to spend everything on the cost of care until it's all gone.
Right.
I mean, you can do that, but I don't know that that's necessarily the best decision. It's certainly not a good economic decision, but that's entirely up to the people. If that's what they want to do it. If it's not what you want to do, which most people say, don't. So, all right, so we are coming up on the
We're
last
winding
minute.
down, aren't we?
We're in the last minute. So, listen, call me at Pierchoski Estate Law, Pierchoski Elder Law, 931-363-7222. Again, if you want to go to one of the seminars, we've got one coming up on September 14th, Saturday at 10 o'clock. That one's in Pulaski. One November 2nd, which is up in Franklin. That's a little ways out. But you can get on that RSVP list by calling that. You can go to my website, estateplanstan.com.
Right.
And you can ask a question there, or call me and ask a question, or email me a question.
Yeah. And if you would like to be in the theater,
Well, yeah, probably don't have time for that. But hey, don't forget we're doing Grease with a twist. Where
That's right.
All the actors are going to be old guys, and girls.
looking forward to it. We'll see you next Friday, buddy.
Sounds like a plan. See you, Jeff.
Jeff blamed on Debbie. I'm Dave Anthony, Fox News. It is the 8th one since hitting Florida as a hurricane Monday. A woman near Greensboro, North Carolina, killed when a tree fell on her. This says Debbie's remnants moved quickly north, full of rain that could cause even more flooding.
Rain is much heavier compared to where we were at earlier this morning.